probably a bit more apprehensive about crude humor than most people. Sure, I like a bit of slapstick and such, but I have my limits. I don't really go for the really cringeworthy, mean-spirited, sexual, adult stuff like South Park, Rick and Morty, Archer, or a lot of these so-called comedy movies that come out nowadays. Like, I can appreciate what they're trying to do, but they're not really my thing. Humor, like a lot of stuff, is of course purely subjective, but my sense of humor tends to be a bit more eccentric than most, which is why I like stuff like YouTube poops.
The teacher said, "Quiet, please." Rog said, "No need to shout." The teacher said, "No need to breathe." Then there were only 46. Yeah.
Gary's Mod videos.
What's that? I am a cake.
Internet memes, like the stupidest stuff imaginable can send me into hysterics. It's just the way I am. But on a different topic, I don't really care about Dutch movies most of the time either. But there are exceptions to every rule, and right on the fringes of my palate lies this movie, Vet Hart. A 2005 Dutch action comedy released in English-speaking territories under the oddly derivative, but nevertheless appropriate title of Too Fat, Too Furious.
Though this movie is actually sort of a remake of a 2002 Danish film entitled Gamle Mand I Nye Bielig, which some of my Danish friends tell me was apparently a lackluster sequel to a much better movie. So this movie right here is a remake of a disappointing sequel to a superior first installment.
Kinda makes you wonder why they didn't just remake that movie instead. But that aside, this movie is actually pretty rare by Dutch cinema standards, considering it takes after Hollywood action flicks, which usually aren't done over here. The last real example of that would probably be Dick Maas's works, like Amsterdam and The Lift. But enough digressing, let's get to the movie.
We open on our protagonist, fat and occasionally furious snack bar owner Benny, having a decidedly unfurious and rather touching little moment with his dear old adoptive father Johan Mast, or Mast for short, as he gives him a birthday gift. That's one of my favorite parts of this movie right there, the relationship between these guys. The actors play it very genuine, especially Mast, who is just the sweetest old guy, and these moments are legitimately heartwarming.
Heel goed, jongen. Je gezondheid is het belangrijkste wat je hebt, moet je maar denken.
But their little moment is interrupted by their boss Milo, a gangster with Eastern Bloc connections, who sternly reminds them that they're on the job. So they suit up and drive their van in the direction of a nearby jewelry store to the tune of George Baker's Una Paloma Blanca. Better get used to hearing that, folks. This movie's freaking in love with that song. Unfortunately, Benny's aim is kinda off, and his negligence to wear his seatbelt comes back to bite him hard.
Recht door de gevel, tegen de plantenbak, vechtgrond.
Milo's not happy to see the job go south, and thus he legs it, as his goons drag off Mast, leaving Benny in his unfortunate position. Cut to 5 years and 8 months later, as Benny's been serving a hefty prison sentence, but after finally being released, he's surprised to find nobody bothered to come and pick him up. Of course, just as he's out on the streets again, Milo turns up with some of his buddies.
Hey Benny, hebben ze je eindelijk vrijgelaten?
Je hoor, ik ga zeep halen voor de directeur.
Milo wants Benny to repay his debt by pulling a job for them, and in the meantime he drops off his klutzy cousin Vuk to stay with them. Why? I don't know, just to piss Benny off, I guess. His only real purpose in this movie is to mess things up and then serve as a punching bag for Benny, which is amusing, but feels a bit tacked on. Anyway, they go to Benny's snack bar, which he's unpleasantly surprised to find has been appropriated by his buddies Peter and Martin, as they felt baking quiches would be the next big thing. Benny expresses his displeasure the only way he knows how. Yeah, one thing you'll quickly learn about Benny is that he's got a temper short as a rat's tail, and if you piss him off, it's his way or get the hell out of his way.
Dit is Fuck. Die doet iets in elektriciteit.
Elektriciteit? Is er helemaal niks mis mee?
Ja, nu wel.
But the biggest shock is yet to come, as it turns out Mast's in the hospital due to his failing liver and only has a few weeks to live. Aw, Benny can be abrasive, but you gotta feel sorry for the big lug. Mast tells Benny that he once had a fling with a flight attendant whom he knocked up, and she ran off with their son and Benny's brother, Koen, who's now in a jail in Liège, Belgium. So, Mast asks Benny to fetch Koen for him so that he can finally meet his dad before it's too late. But since they need a liver transplant from Mast, preferably from a relative, Benny figures Koen is as good a donor as any, and so drags Peter and Martin along to bust the kid out of jail. Yeesh, Benny doesn't even know Koen yet and he already wants to cut him up. cold. Along the way, the gang comes up with an elaborate, wacky plan to bust Koen out, which then leads to the single best scene in the movie.
Koen? Je vader weer zien. Ik heb geen vader.
They get away scot-free, somehow, but as they make a pit stop along the way, they found out exactly what Koen was in prison for.
Koen M. zit een levenslange straf uit voor het vermoorden en verkrachten van minstens 5 vrouwen.
Die gast heeft 5 vrouwen vermoord. En verkracht.
Ach man, daar hebben ze toch niks van gevoeld. Toen waren ze al dood.
Now let me be absolutely clear here, rape is not funny. Necrophilia is also not funny. So when the movie tries to make a running gag out of this...
Hey!
Ze was gevallen.
Yeah, I have a serious problem with that. And yet I somehow can't help but snicker at it anyway. Still, once Koen does eventually meet his dad, it gets pretty emotional. Even more so when he learns the old guy's gonna kick the bucket soon. And seeing the two of them, Benny decides not to go through with Plan A anymore. Plan B is to call in a back alley doctor who can get them an illegal liver transplant, provided they can scrounge up 270,000 euros for him. So we then cut to a bank, where we meet Katja, who we see is a bit unstable. As she just went through a messy breakup with her cheating boyfriend and so asked to deposit her entire savings to his account.
Is er nog ruimte voor een mededeling?
Jazeker.
Ik wil jou. Ik wil jou. En die blonde sloerie. Blonde sloerie. Niet zien op mijn begrafenis. Op mijn begrafenis. Smeerlap.
Just then, Koen shows up to rob the place and calls Benny for help. But Katja seems to be totally okay with the prospect of getting shot and killed. And Koen finds himself instantly attracted to her. Aw, a psycho and a manic-depressive. They're perfect for each other. Still a better love story than Twilight.
Hey, een Benny.
Weg heb ik gezegd! Weg!
Hey! Kom op! Ben jij zo'n vetzak?
Wie is er hier een vetzak?
Dan moet ik nog wel mee naar mijn begrafenis.
En ik ben niet dik! Ja!
Hallo!
Wow, great service. It's rare to see a clerk so dedicated to keeping her clients happy. Of course, it's not long before the cops show up, and so Benny and Koen are forced to make a run for it, dragging Katja along as a hostage. But Koen's having a blast like he's playing Payday 2 or something. Of course the freaking chase scene is set to George Baker as well, why wouldn't it be? But after a lengthy and spectacular car chase, they end up jumping right into a nearby cinema and land on top of Dutch film critics René Mioch and Jacques Godery. Cameo! And somehow they again get away after that. Never mind breaking a highly dangerous prisoner out of jail, these guys are guilty of robbery, assault, and several traffic violations, and yet we never hear from the cops again. Hey, who needs consequences when we can have comedy? Unfortunately, the money's not nearly enough to cover the cost of the liver, but while Benny counts, he and Koen bond a little as Koen asks about Most's vintage Mercedes, Betsy.
Onze eerste grote liefde. En ik was de chauffeur. Vanaf mijn 16e.
Kunnen we die auto niet verkopen?
Oh shit, son, you done fucked up now.
Is de goed hondenkop? Want ik zeg dit maar één keer, dit is niet zomaar een auto. Dat is de auto van Mast. En als je haar wil verkopen, dan kan je net zo goed naar het ziekenhuis om de stekker eruit te trekken.
So then it's on to Plan C. Since Katja was yelling about how her boyfriend Lars, a famous boxer, was meant to take a dive in an upcoming match, they figure they can get the money by betting against him. But of course, fate has to throw a monkey wrench into the proceedings yet again. But Benny's not one to take a little thing like fate for granted and thus runs down Lars with his car, beats the shit out of him, and stuffs him in the trunk.
Ja, wat?
Taking Lars back to the snack bar, Benny tries putting the fear of God into him to get him to pay up, but then Vuk has to go and screw that up too.
We kunnen er nog redden!
Nou, die betaalt niet meer.
So all that's left now is Plan D, where Benny agrees to do the job for Milo. That night at the hospital, Koen gets up to his old tricks again when a bitchy nurse gets between him and Must. I should normally be horrified by this, but then she is played by the former host of the Dutch version of The Weakest Link, so I guess that makes it okay?
Ze was gevallen.
I'm still torn on whether that's funny or not. Then Katja shows up, much to Koen's delight, and she proceeds to give Benny a piece of her mind.
En zeker geen dikzak met een bivakmuts gaat mij vertellen wat ik moet doen.
But Benny is just completely done with everything by this point.
Ik ben niet dik.
Katja wakes up later in her freezer next to the dead bodies of the nurse and Lars, whom she's all too happy to see got his just desserts, so she works out her frustrations on him. She soon breaks out while Benny is holding a meeting regarding the job to rob a money transport at Schiphol Airport. So Koen volunteers to drive Katja back home, and she sees fit to invite him inside for some coffee. But while she goes off to have a shower, she kinda seems to have forgotten that she's invited a psycho inside. And speaking of psycho...
Ga jij mijn douche repareren? Wat lief.
And lo, the beast looked upon the face of beauty, and beauty stayed his hand. And from that day forward, he was as one dead.
Koen goes to tell the good news to Must, and he's so happy for him that he gives him the keys to Betsy. And Benny watches all this unfold like a green-eyed monster. Anyway, the job gets underway shortly after that. Benny, Peter, and Martin are in an ambulance with Must, don't ask me why they thought it was a good idea to bring him along, while Koen is watching the transport from the business class lounge with Katja, who thinks they're going on their honeymoon. But while they're there, she decides to pass the time by having Koen, be nice to her. After the money is loaded onto the plane, Vuk then goes in to do what he does best. Provide a distraction when an explosive he plants on a passenger plane's wing makes a panel fall on top of him, allowing Benny and company to slip in with their ambulance. But Katja gets wind of what Koen was really there for and mistakenly thinks he was peeping at a flight attendant. So she runs off to go and kill herself again.
En je bent ook niet welkom op mijn begrafenis.
Ah well, better to have loved than lost than only to have loved a corpse, right Koen? But just as planned, Benny and friends board the plane with the money on it and force the pilot to take off. Except when Benny then goes to shoot back at the pursuing police, the pilot quickly exits stage right. So their only other option is to then put Must, still doped up on morphine, in the pilot's seat in the hopes that he'll get them flying. He actually does pretty well, all things considered.
Rustig maar, de ambulance komt zo.
The next step is to drop off the containers with money in the IJsselmeer, next to a ship where Milo and his crew are waiting. Unfortunately, Must goes down with one of the crates and Benny is forced to let it sink as he struggles to save his dear old dad, thus letting his cut of the profits sleep with the fishies. But after resurfacing, Benny goes right on to Plan E, threaten Milo as he forces him and his crew to take a dip while he takes their money.
Zonde van al dat geld. Ik heb toch alles wat ik wou hebben. Dit hebben jullie dus allemaal voor mij gedaan. Er zijn zonen die je krijgt. En er zijn zonen die je kan kiezen.
Aw. But just as they spot a police blockade up ahead, Milo and friends just come in and force them out of the van again, which is when Must feels like going for a drive. Milo tries to stop him, but...
Oké, stop ouwe gek.
Daar maak je niet meer bang, Milo. En hoe zit het met jou?
That's the saddest thing I saw until Joss Whedon's Serenity. So all that's left now is for Koen to patch things up with Katja, which kinda works itself out.
Jij valt toch op haar? Nou, moet je gewoon zorgen dat zij ook op jou valt.
Het is dit, waar ben ik?
Je bent naar beneden gekomen om je verloofde te zien.
Hij? De mooie jongen.
So they forced the amnesiac into a marriage with a man she doesn't even know. Okay, sure, why not? But in the end, Koen gives the keys to Betsy back to Benny to patch things up between them, and so the two brothers drive off to Koen's marriage, and then run over Vuk one last time for good measure as we close on that song.
If I may be perfectly candid for a moment, after rewatching this movie, I was rather apprehensive about doing a review on it because, wow, this is so far removed from my usual fare in terms of dark comedy. But regardless of that, I still love this thing.
The blunt force slapstick where Benny will just beat the shit out of, shoot, or otherwise get physical with anyone who annoys him is strangely infectious. But he's still likable regardless of that because of the touching bond with his father and how he gradually has to learn to let go and grows to like Koen as well. Koen, on the other hand, I question this movie's attempt to make a necrophiliac serial rapist look sympathetic, and the love story, goofy though it may be, is just cringeworthy. Especially because Koen and Katja never reconcile their differences, and instead it just gets solved by Deus Ex Amnesia. And Vuk was just unnecessary comic relief in a movie that's already a straight-up slapstick comedy. But that aside, the performances are solid, the comedic timing is good, and the action is surprisingly spectacular and well executed for a Dutch production, even with some questionable CGI in places.
In short, if you're in the mood for some good old-fashioned slapstick from a country you might not necessarily be familiar with and you're not scared off by some of its darker, more twisted themes, give this movie a watch. Anyway, Christmas is right around the corner, so I better go get ready.
Hey there, congratulations on making it through my review of this messed up little movie. If you want to stay up to date on my latest videos, go ahead and hit that big subscribe button up there, and feel free to check out some of my other videos as well. If you want to support my channel with a monthly pledge for every full-length video I make, click on the big orange Patreon logo to go to my Patreon page and get some nifty rewards. I've recently added some new goals as well, so if my total amount gets high enough, you'll get more awesome content for your buck to boot. As always, thank you very much for watching, and see you all out there somewhere.